بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما.
صلوات على محمد وعلى محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وبه نستعين وهو خير ناصر ومعين ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وآله الطيبين أما بعد. Mu'mineen and respectful audience members, Syed Sulaiman and Al-Bayt Forum, it is my pleasure to be here. My first visit to this forum, and I'm really excited by the combination of the traditional Hausa knowledge that we have and the latest research that is being done in academia. I think in general for the Muslim population to benefit and to have some knowledge of the latest tools and trends that are happening in academia in combination with their own heritage and in combination with whatever tools that they have, and some of which I will try to expose today, that will be a very good pedagogical tool, that will be a very useful tool in certain specific aspects. Now, the purpose of my presentation today is twofold. One is that I want to speak to you, I want to introduce to you this aspect and this concept of the manuscript which we have in Islam. You might have seen it, and as the brother mentioned, upstairs you have this calligraphy and calligraphic forms. And many of you, I am sure, have in your homes these things which are family trees or shajara namas or old Qur'ans. But you're curious to know about its history, you're curious to know about the paper, you're curious to know about the calligraphic forms. So my purpose today is to make you aware of those things, to kind of bring an awareness about a part of your heritage which I have seen more commonly in many, many Muslim homes. There's many Sayyids, and these Sadat have a family tree going back many, many generations, all the way to the Ahlul Bayt, and they're curious about how to read it, right? They do not have the tools to read it and to take that research a little bit further. So one purpose that I have today is kind of try to provide you with a brief overview of these things. The second purpose that I have today is to share with you some of the latest tools which we have that are emerging in academia in North America. And these tools are very new. The study of Islamic manuscripts is very new to the study of Islam in North America. Europe is far ahead. The collections that European universities have are very advanced and much larger than the collections of manuscripts that we have here in North America. And within Islamic studies, within those folks in Islamic studies and academia who focus on pre-modern material and other material, Islamic manuscript literacy is becoming extremely common. Another loud salawat, please. So how did I become interested in these manuscripts to begin with? Because when I started studying in the Hausa, be that at private homes in New Jersey or be that in the holy city of Qom, I became interested in the form of writing. What is it that this script is? And sometimes we had some teachers that would teach from a lithograph. And what is a lithograph? I will come to that in a second. And when I started tracing the genealogy and the history of the lithograph, I found that it all went back to the manuscript. And the manuscript tradition in Islam comes to a halt, a small halt, in the 19th century. So that means over 1,000 years of manuscript writing and a manuscript presentation are a part of Islamic heritage. The second thing that I found is that these manuscripts were widely available in the Hausa. These manuscripts, especially in the holy city of Qom, in the library of Atullah Marashi Najafi, for example, they're there. In the homes of Muslims, they're there. But the literacy about it is not very prevalent. Not many people are interested. They're more interested in the content. Of course, the content is very important, but the form is also very important, as you see. Usually we have experts who are curators, who only know about the art form, about calligraphy, about paper, about binding and these things. They're not interested and do not specialize in the content of the books. And we have people who are experts in usul and fiqh and tafsir, but they're not sure what the genealogy of these books and the writing forms is. So I'm trying to combine these two things with some other aspects. So that is the conclusion that I came to while I was there in the Hawza. At Stanford University, we have a very big campus, and in one of the libraries, in the Lane Medical Library, what I found was that there were many items from the Islamic world. There were over 300 items that were there, and some of the professors that have been there for almost 10 years were not aware. Some of the professors in Islamic studies were not aware that these items even existed, because there was no specialist in Islamic studies working on them. And out of those 300 items, there are about 90 manuscripts, and the rest are rare books and lithographs and other items. So what I found myself doing is researching and writing, and there's a weblog, as you can see, this weblog that I run currently, which tries to provide some information on the study of these manuscripts and these items. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So these are some terms and some basic terms I would like to introduce you to, and I would like these terms to be well known. And some of you who are taking notes, these 3-4 terms are extremely important to the study of manuscripts. So what is a manuscript, really? A nuskhe khatti, as they call it in Persian. It is an entirely handwritten and hand-produced document. No part of this document is made by any kind of a machine. It is a handwritten document. It is used for a variety of purposes. In the Holy Quran, or for poetry, or for issues of royal decrees, especially in the early modern period, or for writing personal notes, or for other variety of purposes. It is the handwritten document. And it comes with a combination of different aspects, which is a combination of different scripts, different types of paper, different types of binding materials, and different types of presentation techniques, as you have probably seen, but just need to be made aware of. Then you have the aspect of a manuscript. If this is a manuscript, you have the paper and the binding, but there's also the calligraphic form, which is the most apparent form, which is the most obvious form, which is the form that you become very familiar with. So I'm interested in exposing to you today some of the calligraphic forms, the ways of writing, and the names of some of these scripts that you have probably seen many, many times over. So these calligraphic forms are within the Arabic writing system. And when we say Arabic writing system, we do not just mean the Arabic language. We mean every single language which has its own alphabet, which is derived from Arabic. And there's many languages. We cannot count these languages, all the way from Arabic to Persian, to Ottoman Turkish, to Urdu, to Malay, to Uyghur in Western China, to North African and Maghribi. Any kind of Islamic community. And the beauty of the Islamic intellectual history is that Arabic and the Arabic script spread throughout, with the importance of ritual prayer and everything else. The importance of the Arabic writing system was preserved, as opposed to a tradition like Buddhism, where everything had to be translated. From Indian languages, it went into Tibetan. From Tibetan, it went to Chinese. From Chinese, it went to Korean. From Korean, it went to Japanese. So the Buddhist text that the Japanese receives has gone through several languages and changes. Whereas in the Islamic tradition, the Arabic text that has gone from Hijaz to Yemen to India to Malaysia is in Arabic. And all the writing forms in the Islamic world preserve Arabic. So when I say calligraphic forms, when we say calligraphic forms, we mean every single script, which we cannot count, but we're just going to go over the famous ones that we have in all these different languages and all these different writing systems. So as Islamic knowledge spread historically, so did a writing system. When Islam came from the Arabic worlds to the Persian world, the Persians had their own writing system, which they developed in accordance with Arabic, and their own script and their own techniques. The same thing happened in India. The same thing happened in Southeast Asia. And that is the aspect, not just the intellectual content, but also the writing system and the writing form that I would like to create an awareness about. Who are the people who are doing this kind of work? Who are the main people who are doing this copying and writing? There are this part and this profession in traditional Islamic society, at least until the pre-modern times, and very prominent in the pre-modern times, which is the 16th century, which is the 15th century, and the 17th and the 18th centuries. At these times, you have scribes and copyists. They form their own profession within Islamic society. Their job is to be the secretaries, the typists of that age, if you will. And they would sit and copy out for hours and hours and hours. So there's no mass production of a manuscript. There's mass copying. Paper and scripts and binding comes together, and a scribe sits and he copies out from one copy to another. He makes a copy of a manuscript. But then he goes to another one. This is not being made by a machine which is making the same thing over and over again. It's made by a human being who's prone to error, who's prone to tiredness, who's prone to change of his mood and his mind. And all those different things are expressed within the manuscript. So really it's a history of the culture and the society of the Islamic world, as you can see in this manuscript. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. The third thing I would like to familiarize with you with, and this is a resource in academia that many of you can use and should use and are able to use, usually for a small fee or even freely if it's a public university, is the special collections, which is where I live, which is where I reside in academic libraries. Those special collections contain Islamic manuscripts, they contain rare books, they contain items from the Islamic world, which is what we're speaking about. And if you want to have some access, if you want to have some time, you can go and look at these special collections. They're closed stacks, which means you go there, you have some special equipment that you use to look at these books, which of course are usually old and usually fragile. And it depends on what the university is. Northwestern here, for example, has 3,000 manuscripts, mostly from North Africa and West Africa, and mostly on Sufism. You can go look at that. Other universities have different ones. And this is just becoming a part of the latest type of research that we have in North America in these universities. Some of them have digitized their collections. UCLA, Princeton, Harvard, Michigan, these places have digitized their collection. That means you can go online freely, have access to their website, and download and read and look at these manuscripts that you will see. So you can do it from the comfort of your own home, and you can look at the research that is being done on them, and you can familiarize. And if you have some objects and some articles in your home, then you can actually interpret them by learning and looking at what these special collections provide. This is what a lithograph looks like. How is a lithograph made? This chape sangi, as they say in Persian, is basically a limestone or a piece of stone, and this image is etched out or made out on that limestone, and then it's used like a stamp. So this is stamped over and over and over again. So part of it is human creativity, then it becomes kind of a mass production. This system was created in 1796 in Germany. Then it became extremely popular in the colonial world, it became extremely popular to the Europeans, and it spread to India. So you have a lot of places in India, and this actually is a manuscript in Persian from India. And this lithograph reflects the popularity of the technology at that time. Keeping the lithograph aside, we come to the important thing, which is the manuscript. This is a copy of a manuscript. I'm not sure of the provenance, but the text itself is Dalailul Khairat, which is a very famous prayer manual, a dua manual actually, from the Sunni tradition, from 14th century Morocco, if I'm not mistaken. As you can see, there are different aspects of this beautiful art form, of this manuscript. There is that blue thing at the top, which you see is a sarlauh, or the headpiece, which is created by a specialist. Another specialist comes in and creates the borders and the illuminations and the illustrations and those beautiful flowers that you see. The image is not very clear. And the scribe and the copyist comes and in front of him is a copy of the book, and he sits there and he copies this out. So there's only three. There's three people who are just involved in creating what you see on the paper. Then the creation of the paper, the history of the paper, the provenance of the paper, where did it come from, the binding techniques, the dyeing techniques, the marbling techniques. These are all the different specializations that come into the history of a manuscript. So there's a lot for those who want to study the history and the culture of the Islamic manuscript. Now I'd like to trace for you briefly, in a very short time, the history of writing and the history of paper and scripts in the Islamic world. So we know at the time of the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his family, that the companions, when they wrote down, I'm not a specialist in early Islam, I'm more interested in the early modern period, but in any case, we know that they wrote down the Holy Quran on the bones of animals, on parchment, which is the skin of animals, sometimes on wood itself. And that continued until the beginning of the second Islamic century, when the Muslim world expanded to Central Asia, to what is now Samarkand, and what was under the influence of the Chinese civilization at that time. And paper making was, of course, in tradition in China for a long time. And what the Muslims did in Samarkand is they took these Chinese paper makers, they realized the importance of this technology because making paper is a lot cheaper and a lot durable than killing a lamb every time you want to create a document, or killing an animal every time you want to create a document. So what these Muslims did was took this technology, and that technology spread very rapidly throughout the Muslim world. From Samarkand and to Baghdad. Baghdad became a very big center of paper making, to Damascus, to Cairo, all the way to the west until it reached Europe in the 11th century. It also reached India, and India is one of the only places today within what used to be at least part of the larger Islamicate world where you can see traditional methods of paper making. Handmade methods of paper making are still made in certain parts of North India. We also see, specifically with the history of the Imams, and this is the question I was curious about and I have not found an answer, is that when Imam Sadiq alayhi salam in the city of Medina had his school, and he had 4,000 students there at that time in Medina, what is it that they were writing on? Because knowledge was spreading. This was the first time that there was a revival after the tragedy of Karbala within the Islamic system of knowledge and knowledge production. What were they writing on and what were they writing with? It's kind of early to say that paper had reached them. No, paper had probably not reached them. It was probably parchment or probably papyrus, which is the pulp of the papyrus tree which they used to write on. The second thing is, by the time that the 8th Imam, Imam Rida alayhi salatu wasalam, was in the city of Marv and Khorasan, which is the eastern part, paper production and paper technology had probably reached the Islamic world at that time. So his conversations, his ideas, the ihtijajat that you see of Imam Rida, if they were written and codified at that time, it was probably done on paper, within a difference of about 50 or 60 years, because by the year 200, paper has become popular in the city of Baghdad. So this is one thing about history that we can look at. Now we see in this picture two different methods of producing print and producing information. On the left you have the printing press, which was used and which began to be used in Europe in 1450s, 52 or 53. So very early on, in the middle of the 15th century, you have this printing technique, and John Gutenberg and the famous Gutenberg Bible, which has 148 pages. Pages are distributed all over the world, and when this page of the Gutenberg Bible arrived in New York City on its way actually to Stanford University, all the customs agents who saw it took off their hats in respect to the Gutenberg Bible, which is the first major, it's a very big page of printed scripture. But when this technology arrived in Europe, it became extremely popular. In the first 100 years, between 1453 and 1553, over 1 million books were produced by print. Over 1 million books. That means that this structure is being made everywhere else, is becoming accessible to everybody, and everybody is trying to print whatever information they had. And that comes at the cost of the removal of the handwritten manuscript, which was there in Europe, the art form, the tradition of scribes and copyists that slowly died out. And there was a lot of resistance. The Benedictine monk Trithemius, he wrote a very nice treatise on the art of writing, De Laude Scriptorum, in praise of the scribes. Very beautiful book about what it means to write. What is the beauty of writing? Why is it important that monks and scribes should sit with these books and copy them out and write them out instead of just printing them by machine? On the other hand, in this other picture, which is a painting from the Mughal world, which is from 16th century India, you see these two scribes who are definitely engaged in copying something out. They did not have desks. They wrote mostly on their knees by using cardboard or other things on which they copied, like a clipboard, what we would have today. They had all the utensils of writing, which is pen, paper, nibs, sharpeners, ink, different metals that they use for different things, different types of papers, different types of scripts were used for different kinds of documents, an extremely complicated system, an extremely complex language of writing and scribal activity. And these people, of course, in any profession, they had all the theological and they had all the philosophical underpinnings which justified and defined their activity. So a famous poem that was written on one of the Moroccan items is يَكُونُ الْخَطُّ فِي الْقِرْطَاسِ دَهْرًا وَكَاتِبُهُ رَمِيمٌ فِي التُّرَابِ. That the script will remain on the page for a long time while the writer has become dust in the earth. So it's a way for you to immortalize yourself. It's a way for you to immortalize your own activity on paper. And they did this with a lot of pride. For example, you hear that the ink of the scholar is better than the blood of the martyr. Actually, these people say the ink of the scribe is better than the blood of the martyr. And the blisters that the scribe gets by sharpening his nib is better than the battle wounds that the soldier gets. And the pen and the nibs of the scribes are better than the swords of the soldiers who are in the war. So of course they're vying for patronage, they're fighting for patronage, and they're trying to do this. But this culture remained in the Islamic world for a very long time. Print did arrive. Print did come in about 1620 or 1618. The Shah Abbas of Iran was given a print machine by a European monk or religious figure, I forget his name. When this was given to Shah Abbas, it was not used. So the Muslims knew about print. They knew that the Europeans read and used print, that this technology was available. But for whatever reason, which I'm not sure about, which is not my area of expertise, this did not gain currency and become popular in the Islamic world until the 19th century. In about 1800, the first printing presses were established in Calcutta, where Persian was used and other vernacular language were used. In 1828, the first mass production of print came in the city of Isfahan. In 1848, at BUI14 in Cairo, you have the first major printing presses established by the French and the Europeans. So for a period of 500 years at least, the Muslims kept writing and writing with their hands when print was widely used in Europe. I want to introduce you to some of these scripts and give you a brief overview of these scripts. So I will present you with some images where you can trace, where we can look at different periods and different scripts. So we have this Hijazi on the bottom, which is the earliest, one of the earliest ones used in the Hijaz. And this actually is the palimpsest of the Sana'a Quran. Some of you know about this Sana'a Quran, which was carbon dated at Stanford University and which is within about 15 or 20 years of the Prophet's death. So it's a very early document that we have within the Islamic world. Then there's the Mashq, there's Kufic, which you know. I'm just going to give you a brief overview because we have shortage of time. Then in the 11th century, under the Mamluks and the Fatimids, you have the presentation of the Thuluth script, which you have, and then you have the Muhaqqaq on this side. So one is Thuluth, which is used mainly for Quran and copying and writing the Holy Quran. We have the Nasq script, which emerged in Baghdad and in Isfahan, where early New Persian, where Persians, when they start having retention of their own language after the Arab arrival, not invasion, arrival, is that they have this Nasq script, which is written for Quran. Of course, Nasq means something that abrogates, and it abrogated everything else. And this is what they used to write, and this is actually a manuscript probably from the 13th century, the earliest one we have at Stanford, in the special collections, and it's actually is illuminated. Very beautiful manuscript in philosophy and natural history. But this is the Nasq script. And this, some of you might be familiar with, especially Persian speakers. You have the Nastaliq script, 15th century Persia. It came about to write poetry, and it came about to write poetic couplets, which people would then hang on their walls, which you call tughra, especially in Urdu. Shikasta Nastaliq came about 200 years later, and it's just a quicker way of writing Nastaliq. And people, they did not spell things out. A father says to his son, do not insult your readers by putting all the nuqtas. Don't spell it out for them, because they are able to make out what the meaning of the words are. And this is how they learned by ideographs. They looked at images and they said, this is what it really means. They didn't spell it out like we spell it out in English. This is how learning took place, especially in 17th century. Indian Naskh, some of you might be familiar with on the left, which is used for the Quran. And this again emerged as language emerged, as Urdu and other vernacular languages emerged in the early modern period in India and other places. And of course, one of the first items that was written in Urdu was the eulogies and the marathi of Ahlul Bayt, which were written in the Deccan, actually in the 16th century. And these type of scripts were used to write those things out. On the right is Indian Naskh, which we know very little about. It looks like Shikasta, but it's got very different things very different characteristics from Shikasta. If you Google the term Islamic manuscripts of North America, which I would like you to do, those who are interested, then you will see a list of all. One of my colleagues in Michigan, she has put all these things in one website where you can look at all the digital collections and the special collections that are available at American universities, especially at Northwestern and other places. Madison, I don't think, has a collection, but Northwestern and other places have put some of these items online in which you can access and download. As you see, this is Princeton Library, has the Digital Library of Islamic Manuscripts. This is UCLA, not very useful website, but UCLA has these manuscripts that you can go and browse through. Harvard University has it by country, has it by topic, and you can browse through and read them. And one thing I would like to say is that this is very important for language acquisition. I know that there's a Hausa being established, and I hope that it is successful in also providing this kind of access to the students, because once they can read and they can interpret and they can understand a manuscript, then their language acquisition capacities become very powerful and become very strong. This is the best way in which you can have Arabic and Persian being taught to any kind of student that is interested in these things. And the last thing I would like to end with is the Murtazavi library of Syed Hussain Murtaza, who's a Shia scholar, very recent, of this century, of the last 2 decades in Pakistan. His personal library is being digitized by one of my colleagues in the city of Karachi. The student of Qom is now putting his grandfather's material and personal archives online. So I want to kind of repeat the fact that we have to look into our own things. And many people have said we have family trees and other Qur'ans which we cannot read or interpret. This is a good resource for you to go back and understand that the culture and the knowledge that you have of your own tradition can be studied and looked at, and there are tools available for which you can do that. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين.